afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this pitching session organized by the Malaysian Youth Delegation. For those of you who haven't yet joined us on one of these, the purpose of the pitching sessions is to create awareness on specific climate change issues and the current and upcoming solutions that are available to help tackle these issues. Today, we'll be focusing on climate change adaptation. First, a brief introduction to the Malaysian Youth Delegation, or MYD. MYD is a youth civil society organization that aims to educate Malaysians on climate change and climate policy, to facilitate climate policy advocacy among Malaysian youth, both at the local and international levels, to engage stakeholders, including government, NGOs, and academia, and encourage climate action from them. And last but not least, to make the latest thinking on climate change more accessible to the general public. My name is Jen Ho. I'm a member of the Capacity Building Working Group of MYD, and I will be your moderator for this session today. Just to give you a brief overview of what we'll be doing today, I'll kick things off with an introduction to adaptation. Then our speakers will take over with their pitches, and we have three very interesting topics for you in store for you today. We'll then move into the Q&A session. You'll then get to vote on your favorite pitch before we close things off. So let's begin. I'm sure many of us at some point have heard someone remark on unusual weather. For example, that this dry season is the hottest and driest that they've seen. And if you're from Southeast Asia or live in the region, perhaps you remember this happening very frequently in 2016 when the El Nino was particularly bad. The El Nino is the hot part of a hot-cold climate pattern that affects this region. And in 2016, the El Nino broke national records. It affected harvests very badly. It increased energy consumption for cooling. And in Malaysia, it was a key factor in making the haze worse. According to NASA, the fires in Indonesia, which caused the haze, were the worst in the 15-year satellite record. Thing is, we in Southeast Asia are not alone in facing these events. For example, Europe has been facing worse and worse heat waves. And these events are only going to get worse and more frequent as climate change gets worse. So we should do as much as we can, as soon as we can, or while we can. Before we go any further, I just want to clarify several terms that I've mentioned so far, starting with climate change. Climate change refers to a change in the average weather conditions, which can be linked directly or indirectly to human activity. This is how the United Nations defines it, but Malaysia's national policy on climate change defines it as any change in the climate. However, 99% of scientists do agree that human activity is responsible for these the bulk of the significant increase in global average temperatures over the past 100 to 200 years. This is otherwise known as global warming. You can see here on the chart on the right that the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere have increased significantly in the past 100 or 200 years. And when you compare to the natural cycles in the past several 100,000 years, it is a very drastic and fast change. What can we do about climate change? There are two main methods. The first is to mitigate. So climate change mitigation is trying to solve the problem at the source by reducing the emissions of the greenhouse gases that cause global warming, or to increase or enhance the sinks that absorb these gases from the atmosphere. So far, the increase in carbon dioxide emissions to the atmosphere have been responsible for a 1 degree Celsius increase in global average temperatures. Based on the best available science, global warming of 2 degrees Celsius would be dangerous and could result in um, uncontrollable global warming and therefore climate change. Um, so it's best if we would be able to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or below. And to have a decent chance of doing this, we would need to peak our um, annual carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. That means we need to stop the increase of global carbon dioxide emissions per year. And by 2050, we need to reach net zero on carbon dioxide emissions. So that means the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed and stored needs to be equal to the amount that is emitted to the atmosphere. The second method is to adapt. So climate change adaptation is adjusting to the changes in the climate once they have happened, and everything that comes with that, all the consequences from extreme weather events to loss of biodiversity and so on. You might be thinking, why do we need to spend so much money on mitigation if we could just adjust to the different climate? So every several years, the IPCC, which is the United Nations climate science body, releases an assessment report, which summarizes the accumulated scientific knowledge on climate change. And these charts are from that report, and they show the key climate-related risks for Asia. How do we interpret these charts? So if we take a look at the chart on the right, specifically the second row, this bar shows the near-term risk level of specific climate impact. You can see that the risk level is medium. And this is at current levels of adaptation. If we were to increase and put more effort into climate adaptation, then we would be able to reduce the risk level by a certain degree by this striped section. So you can see that the risk level would go from medium to low. So moving to the charts on the left, which show the climate risks for Asia, there's a significant risk of increased flood damage to infrastructure, livelihoods, and settlements, increased risk of human death due to heat, and increased risk due of drought-related water and food shortage. It's important to note that, of course, Asia is a big continent, and these risks will affect different regions to different degrees. Another important takeaway is that we can only reduce these climate risks by a certain amount. And typically this is constant as the temperature, the changes in the average global temperature increases. But for some climate impacts, there's actually no chance of adapting anymore once global warming goes to 4 degrees Celsius. For example, there's no chance of adapting to the increased risk of heat-related deaths. This is because once humidity hits a certain level, your sweat can't even evaporate and cool you down. Second is crop failure. So at some point, plants, it is difficult for plants to reproduce, and harvest can fail completely. And thirdly, coral reef decline in Asia is unlikely to be able to be attenuated. As I mentioned, we have already seen a 1 degree Celsius increase in global temperatures. If we were to go from 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius, tropical countries like ours are projected to experience the largest climate change impacts on economic growth in the world. Climate-related disasters would account for 30% of GDP damage due to natural disasters in Southeast Asia. So as you can see, it's best if we can prevent this from even happening. But given that we've already locked in some amount of climate change because of that, a minimum 1 degrees Celsius of global warming, we need to plan and prepare for some impacts. At the moment, only some countries in the region are putting in significant effort to adapt to climate change, namely Vietnam and the Philippines. But as you can see on the map on the left, most of the countries in the region have some states or some part of the country that have a medium to high exposure to climate hazards. So every country should be starting to plan and prepare for these potential impacts. If you were just starting out, what could you do? So you could take inspiration or experience from other countries. We in this region do pretty well with early warning systems and water resource management, but there's room for improvement in other areas. For example, we could work on combining traditional and scientific knowledge. Traditional approaches to food and water management have survived the test of time, and they are well tailored for very specific local contexts. There are growing movements in agriculture that try to combine these different approaches to create more resilient agricultural systems. For example, there's permaculture or no budget natural farming. We could do more in ecosystem-based adaptation, which works with nature to create an environment where both flora and fauna can thrive alongside human society, and can both of them can benefit from each other. We could also start to try and move away from monoculture and grow more resilient crop varieties. And you can see also that a lot of these techniques involve planning and implementing strategies, for example, to cope with sea level rise, to cope with reduced water availability, or to cope with natural disasters. These require a lot of collaboration, which between different stakeholders such as governments and the private sector, and well, the general public, which is not necessarily the strongest in many cases. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And these are just a few in a large range of techniques. We will likely need a combination of many of these, and different combinations can be more useful for well, different countries, different regions, and different situations. So we need to well, plan according to the unique circumstances of each application. MYD itself doesn't have any initiatives in these spaces, but we do hope that your rich expertise and your varied backgrounds here at IGAM can bring insights and inspire collaboration in these areas. Our speakers today will be focusing on 3 methods that cover the areas of food security, energy security, and infrastructure resilience. Our first speaker is Reza. Reza is with the MYD Media Working Group. He has a background in economics and he works as a business analyst in the oil palm industry. He will be speaking today about community-owned renewable energy as a way to provide energy security on the local scale. Our second speaker is Win Sim. Win Sim is with the MYD Policy and Research Working Group, and he has a background in environmental protection and management. He was previously a senior researcher in wildlife conservation, and today he'll be speaking about green infrastructure as a way to create more climate resilient cities. Our final speaker is Balu. Balu is an entrepreneur. He has a background in mass communication and was previously a co-founder of a successful barbershop franchise. He's now moving into urban agriculture, and that's what he'll be talking to us about today. So we'll kick things off with Reza's pitch. So, well, take it away, Reza. Unfortunately, it looks like Reza is having some technical issues and may not be able to join us today. In the meantime, we'll continue with our second pitch by Win Sim. He'll be speaking about green infrastructure for climate resilient cities. Win Sim, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jianho. My presentations, however, focus on climate resilience in Malaysia using green infrastructures. In short, climate change impact in Malaysia can be summed up as follows. When it's monsoon seasons, there's too much water. When it's dry seasons, there's too little water. And already in recent years, we're seeing these climate change impacts in Malaysia. In particular, we're seeing higher flood rates. For example, in 2014, the east coast of in Peninsular Malaysia had been affected by a huge flood. In particular, Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, and even Johor got flooded. And in particular, one of the stadiums in Kelantan got flooded, as shown in the photo here. This will give you an idea of the scale of the flood it gotten. And last month, the central KL was flooded, particularly the Masjid Jamek area, after 4 hours rain, non-stop. So what this means is that as climate change worsens, we'll get more frequent flood and therefore higher flood rates. On the other hand, when it's dry seasons, we'll just have too little water. For example, in 2016, Sungai Lebam Dam in Johor has his water level went below 20%, and that led to water rationings and subsequent prompt the state government to initiate a water transfer scheme from other dams in order to address water insecurity in Johor. In Penang earlier this year, Teluk Bahang Dam has its water level went below 30%. And in August, the same dam had its water level went below 20%. So this gives you an idea how threatened water securities in Malaysia is. And with climate change, it is bound to get worse. So why we need to focus on urban cities? This is because if you look at the stats from the Department of Statistics Malaysia's 2018, there's close to 20% of rural to urban migrations compared to 6.3% of urban to rural migrations. This alone means that there are more people moving from rural areas to urban cities. And this is supported by the data from the World Bank. Since 1960s, the Malaysian's urban population have been increasing steadily. So this means that there are more people and there will be more people in urban cities in near futures. So more people will be affected by the two climate change impact that I mentioned earlier, and not mentioning the economic damage brought by floods and droughts. However, these two issues are not recent and not unique to Malaysia. There have been many successful initiatives or concepts from other countries. For example, Sponge City in China, ABC Waters in Singapore, low impact development in the United States, Canada, water sensitive or blue green cities. Now all these successful initiatives or concepts have one similarities: green infrastructures. So how does green infrastructures work? Now, these 6 keywords from the Spawn Cities initiative or concept explain the mechanism of green infrastructures adequately. The first one, infiltrations. For example, we can use a permeable pavement to allow water to infiltrate into the ground. This will prevent water from accumulating on surface and reduce the flood risk. On the other hand, we can have constructed wetland to hold water temporarily during rainy days. And of course, we can consider constructing underground storage so that the water can be used in dry seasons after this water being collected from during the rainy seasons. And of course, all these green infrastructures, is one big thing about them is that natural vegetations. With natural vegetation, it has this purification effect that allows us to use rainwater for non-essential activities. For example, plant waterings and car washings. And of course, we must have the one we call an integrated water management, that somehow we can channel the water collected from green infrastructure to the existing water infrastructure that we have, so that it can be used by the public. And of course, we don't want more drain infrastructures, in particular drains. Instead, we want rivers with natural vegetations. Now, I will not go into the conventional green infrastructures options in details. Instead, I will focus on 3 notable solutions. First of all, is the interlacing architecture. The photo shown here is the interlace in Singapore. Well, it looks like a bunch of Jenga box buildings built on each other, but what it's trying to do is maximizing the water interceptions surface. And we don't do it alone. We incorporate green roof with this kind of infrastructures. That way we can collect more waters. Or we can consider putting up solar panels with these architectures type. It would be more efficient in collecting water or free up space for other usages. So this is number 1. Second, instead of government-led initiatives, we should try and go for more community-based efforts. And for example, here we have this public participations program in Portland, Oregon, in the United States, where they have volunteers to plant trees, particularly subsidized trees from the city's council. And then we have students planting trees in school. And of course, to encourage people to plant more trees, we should help to capture rainfalls and reduce surface runoff. The cities offers refunds of silver bills if owners decided to take on tree plantings. And of course, there's always this hazard about fallen trees during storms. So the city has this strict tree emergency service. They have emergency phones services standing by for people to call just in case if there's an emergency of fallen trees, they can act on it. So this will encourage ownership by the communities to take on adaptation measures. So when it comes to green infrastructure structures, we should try and let the public to participate and let them take part. Thirdly, this is what we call a risk-based approach, whereby we should try and identify the flood risk area first before implementations of any green infrastructures. Then, after visiting the ground, then we can list out some of the feasible green infrastructure solutions available in that area. So, for example, if that area has underground LT, underground storage won't be feasible. But if there's buildings with unused roof, then perhaps they can consider implementing green roof instead. Once we list down the feasible solutions, then we can start calculating the potential reduction in flood risk. Now, this is crucial because we should only implement if it's possible to achieve high reduction in flood risk. Otherwise, it will just be another white elephant project. And we will be criticized by the people as to why we spend so much money but achieve little in return. Now, of course, we don't want to implement a large-scale green infrastructures program throughout the nations right away. We should instead try to conduct a pilot study using a risk-based approach. For example, in Kuala Lumpur, which is plagued by flood frequently. So those are these three notable solutions that I think Malaysia can try to incorporate. In summary, we are seeing higher flood risk and threatened water security issues in Malaysia, and already we're seeing significant impacts on urban population in Malaysia. However, I would like everybody to keep in mind that these solutions are not silver bullets to address flood risk or water insecurities. They will help to reduce the risk, to reduce the frequency of water rationings. However, they will not eliminate those two impacts completely. This is something that we need to keep in mind and educate the public. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. I hand it back to you, Zeno.
Thank you for your pitch, Winston. I think these are all very important considerations as populations become more and more concentrated in urban areas, and urban areas grow and develop to accommodate this. Okay, and our final pitch for today will be by Balu. So Balu, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Balu. I'm an entrepreneur, the founder of Robots Inc., and an environmentalist. We have heard from all the other presenters earlier on how climate change is affecting our lives. Today, I'm here to speak about a simple yet practical step that we can all take to play our part in mitigating climate change. These are some of the content topics that I will be covering for today. We will start with the introduction, the problem statement, moving on to the benefits of the grow box, top 5 sustainable plants, prototypes, and I'll conclude with a summary of costs. Whether you plant trees around your home, in your community, or in our national forests, they help fight climate change. Through the natural process of photosynthesis, trees absorb CO2 and other pollutant particulates, then store the carbon and emit pure oxygen. Plant biology 101 there. Instead, if you plant your own vegetation, not only do you save money on groceries, it also improves your health with organic food consumption, and the bonus is gardening is a natural stress relief. More people are aware of the effects of traditional gardening and its benefits. By growing your own garden, you are the one to decide what goes into the plants and soil, allowing you to reduce the amount of harmful chemicals polluting our environment and waterways. Growing a garden is not only good for you, it is also good for the environment because it reduces the carbon footprint by decreasing the number of miles it takes to get food to you. Organically growing your own food is sustainable, plus it nourishes your body. However, in today's world, not all of us could afford the luxury of land and space. Most of us live in high-rise buildings and are restricted within confined spaces to grow organic vegetation. And with the rise of COVID-19, the realization for a healthier lifestyle is on the rise, hence the overwhelming demand to supply organic food. While these are the problems, there is also a simple solution, one being in the form of a grow box. Now, what is a grow box? Well, a grow box is a completely enclosed space, creating a safe and controlled environment for your plants to grow from seed to harvest, and most effectively indoors or in small areas. Now, one of the best things about the grow box is that it can be as small as a bedside table, therefore making it very space efficient. A grow box also aims to take basic food nutrition to the people who needs it the most, while fostering the development of sustainable and eco-friendly practices. These are some of the benefits of a grow box. They provide an easy, convenient, and clean environment. This will benefit consumers who do not have sufficient space to grow their own vegetation. For example, in some high-rise buildings, some units have uneven distribution of sunlight, which will affect the quality of your plant. It also promotes self-sustaining food supply options by enabling the variety of organic plants produced, therefore provides food security because it is not entirely dependent on the food supply chain. Most importantly, it tries to promote basic agricultural education due to the simple fact that most common household used vegetation can be grown pretty easily. Top 5 sustainable plants. Here are some top 5 sustainable plants for a household. Cherry tomato normally cost about ringgit Malaysia 5 to 8, but it takes only about 40 to 60 days to harvest, which is approximately 2 months. Here's where it gets a little more fun. Once the fruits are harvested, the plant will keep flowering and producing more fruits, thus making it sustainable. Now, most beans, on the other hand, takes approximately 60 to 90 days to be harvested. String beans, for example, are easy to grow and require very little in the way of maintenance other than regular watering. They aren't susceptible to many pests or diseases and germinate easily from seed. In general, the beans are ready to be picked in 50 to 55 days after planting. You can also grow lettuce, cucumbers, and most culinary herbs, which will take approximately 45 to 90 days. However, the grow box is not limited to just these plants. This is a prototype of a grow box in the works by GBI for a more affordable and convenient way for consumers of organic food to grow their own supply. The grow box comes equipped with a full spectrum grow light, a reflective interior, and proper ventilation. It's a simple yet convenient way to grow your preferred organic vegetation for an estimated purchase value of around 250 to 350 ringgit only. Even more, what we are trying to achieve is to provide a grow box where all you got to do is plug to play and enjoy the show. Meaning, don't worry about electricity. Even if the box is running 24/7, estimated cost of power supply for a month is around 30 to 40 only. As for it being just a box, your maintenance is next to none because the box is just an enclosed space for your plant to live in. All you have to do is plant a seed into a nice pot and watch your plant grow. Did I also mention that the grow box will be equipped with a simple manual on the plants it will be able to grow? and the information needed in order to harvest the fruits of your labor. To sum it up, I believe the grow box has great potential, not only in mitigating climate change, but also help us move toward a better sustainable future. With all that being said, I would like to end this presentation by quoting a renowned urban farmer and a proponent of the urban homesteading movement named Jules Darvas. Now, Darvas was able to raise 3 tons of food per year by sustaining an organic produce business using self-sufficiency techniques. And this is what he said. In our society, growing food yourself has become the most radical of acts. It is truly the only effective protest, one that can and will overturn the corporate powers that be. By the process of directly working in harmony with nature, we do the one thing most essential to change the world. We change ourselves. Go green, guys. Grab some beans and maybe a grow box. Thank you.
Thank you, Balu. As someone who's been actually experimenting with home gardening to be a bit more self-sufficient, I think this could be a really powerful solution, not least for this opportunity to reconnect with nature and be more aware of where our food comes from. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our pitching session. We'll now be moving into the Q&A. Perhaps we can take a couple minutes break in case you want to take a breather, and if you haven't submitted your questions already, please do so, and we'll be back shortly to answer your questions. Remember to close the session on your other screen.
My session, is it? Oh, okay.
Right, everyone, if you have any questions, do submit them. We have one question in already, and maybe we can start with that. So Ash asks to Balu, cool project. When do you expect to launch this product, and how much? I'm assuming they mean how much it will go on market for.
Okay, that's a good question. All right, currently we are in the phase of experimenting with different vegetation, all right? So it is going to take a process, but positively we could say that GBI is hoping to launch in the early 2021 and approximately for a pricing range of 250 to 350 ringgit Malaysia, of course. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Ash. The next question is, well, directed to both of you. Could you talk about some possible downsides to your proposed solutions?
I can go first, if you don't mind, Balu.
Yeah, please.
Problem with green infrastructures is the incompatibility with the current structures in the area that we want to implement green infrastructures. For example, in KL alone, we have too many underground pipes or even LLTs, so that will make certain green infrastructures infeasible. And the land price in scale is very expensive. If you want green space like parks or constructed wetlands, it's just not feasible money-wise. It's just too expensive to implement. So that's number one. Second one, and like I said, is take up some other opportunities. For example, if we implement green roof one buildings, that means we can't put solar panels on that buildings. And thirdly, like I mentioned in my presentations, these solutions will not eliminate the impacts. They will only reduce the impact. So it's still adapting to the flood risk, for example, higher flood risk or droughts. But if it happens, we still have to deal with it. So that's the three challenges for green infrastructures.
Okay. From my perspective regarding Dropbox, the solution of it becoming a reality and the step to get there is very simple. First and foremost, it will all have to link towards awareness, all right? And that is what we're trying to create first regarding the Dropbox, is to first create awareness in order for people to realize that most vegetation is actually just very simple to grow in your home garden and whatnot. So my answer will be awareness, actually. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Balu and Winsim. We have one more question, sort of related to the challenges. So how do you see your solution becoming a reality, and what are the key steps to get there? So in other words, I guess, how would you address those challenges? Do you have a plan? Like maybe you can outline a specific sort of plan to address those challenges.
Okay. And this is the answer addressing me, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the problems first that we are going to definitely have to face will be definitely funding, all right? Because advertising is going to cost, it's as simple as that. As well as when it's regarding to problems, it's pretty much, it's not a problem per se, because currently in today's world, almost majority people are already growing their own vegetation at home, all right, regarding food sustainability, if you're going to go look at it in that aspect, right? So the only problems that we'll be facing is for us providing a solution to the people who aren't able to grow this, you know, lack of land and such. So yeah, awareness, coming back to it. That's what we're striving for right now. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Balu. Winsim, do you have any thoughts?
To implement green infrastructure, I believe that currently the government, specifically the Ministry of Environment and Water, is working on the possible national adaptation plan. And in that national adaptation plan, perhaps the government can consider identifying the areas or locations where green infrastructure are needed. Then from there on, they can approach probably the companies or the people living in those areas and to offer solutions and try to work with them for implementations of green infrastructures and from them to move on. But it still comes back to science. We still need science to guide our decisions. And so we shouldn't just go in because people ask for it. We should do a feasibility studies and try and find out how much risk we can reduce. And then is it worth spending that much money to invest in green infrastructure in those locations? So yes, government policies, and perhaps something to add on is some incentive for private sectors to check on, especially I think what's the previous ministry, NASDAQ, did with solar panels that offer tax break for private companies to take on solar panels to build on their factories or areas available. So that won't be a bad idea if we can offer tax break for companies, private sectors to go for green infrastructure aggressively, particularly in urban cities. Yeah.
Mm. You bring up an interesting point, Vincent. I guess one thought from me would also be what role do people play in influencing government policy? So what I'm thinking of is how do we encourage more bottoms up rather than top down, just top down approaches? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a bit hard because we need the government to kind of give an idea where the implementation should go to, not just I think we need a green roof, so build a green roof. No, it doesn't work that way. But still, we cannot discount that top-down versus bottom-up approach. And because for the second solution that I proposed is actually a bottom-up approach where we need to get people to involve. But the government must initiate first. Then we get people to involve and do it and have ownership over those green infrastructure so that they take care of it. And slowly that will build on awareness for the current generation and the coming generations.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, maybe kind of moving to a more general space. What are the best solution and easy ways to solve climate problems in the current situation? Just give the points, please. Thank you. End question.
I'll try to answer this. There's no an easy answer today. There's no best solution, so to speak, because it's very case specific. If you look at KL versus Penang, it's completely different. They're facing very different problems, whereby the Penang Islands we have rising sea levels that will clog up some of the water discharge during rainy season. In KL, we're probably talking about outdated drainage system. What do you mean outdated? It's just that when it's planned, it's probably planned for 10 years or the coming 20 years, but it has not taken climate change impacts into account. So we're quickly seeing flood getting very severe and high frequent in urban cities. Flash floods become more frequent. So again, we really need to go to the ground and go to that spot to investigate what are the key problems before we can come up with solutions or the best solutions, so-called.
Balu, you have any thoughts on this question?
I mean, Vincent said it all, actually, in my opinion.
Yeah. I guess what I could add on one thing. If the question was intended to ask like what people could do in their personal capacity, of course, an answer I think that a lot of people hear that is often communicated in media, that you need to take personal action and take personal responsibility for your actions. So small things like changing your diet, or changing your light bulbs, and of course those are all good things. But I think, like Winston said, it is an issue that involves the whole system, and it's ingrained. So I think we need to first think whether you want to have an impact on the local scale or the larger scale, and then decide for yourselves what solutions you want to work on from there. So if it's in the local scale, the everyday scale, you could start talking to people and getting communicating to people the importance of the issue, because I think that's still fairly lacking in Malaysia. You could get involved in NGOs which are working on these issues. You could try and get in touch with policymakers. On a larger scale, you could, start a project of your own that brings together lots of stakeholders to try and have a bigger impact if you're interested in doing something more at the country scale. Okay. Not a point-by-point answer, but I hope that answers that answers the question somewhat. Next question is, what is the solution to address the flood in KL?
I believe that my third proposal or the suggestion should be the solutions whereby we deploy a risk-based approach, where we identify where are the areas they are affected significantly by floods. That's the first step. But that alone is insufficient. We need to use a multi-pronged approach as well. The other problem that we're seeing in KL is that, for example, the River of Life initiative, initiated by the previous government, is a failure. I can say because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't make the river, the KL River, a clean river, so to speak. So what's the problem there? People mentality. People been throwing rubbish into the river, and no matter how many restorations or um, green infrastructures project you put in, it is not enough. We still need to have the people on board and try to tackle the issues together. Otherwise, it's not enough. Yeah. So science, and then we need people, the public, together on board.
Cool. Thanks, Winston.
That's a good question.
Okay, we have one last question. If anyone still has any burning questions, do submit them. The question is, what are the potential savings in ringgit that we can get from implementing these adaptation measures? If not a value, then could you please provide examples of where we can minimize economic losses by implementing these strategies?
And this question is directed
To both.
Okay. I'll take the lead on this one. Okay, regarding the question on economical sustainability, it's going to be for the grow box, for instance, like when you're actually growing a vegetation, because let's be clear, sustainability is the order of the day, as I said earlier in my presentation, yeah? And more people are aware of the effects of traditional gardening on the environment these days, okay? So let's put the basics out on ringgit aside. The thing about actually gardening, it actually reduces the carbon footprint and all that was said earlier in the presentations, which is just mitigating it. How it helps is actually reduce stress. It creates a way of lifestyle, organically speaking. And in the cost-effective ways, for example, as I said earlier regarding the cherry tomato sustainability, let's go back to that, yeah? When you actually go to grow, it takes you about 2 months to grow the fruit and harvest the plant, yeah? But after that, it's going to be producing more and more. As it keeps progressing over time, it flowers, it produces more plants. In a way, you could say it's infinite, right? In a way. So in that sense, I think saving costs shouldn't really affect in the long run. In that aspect, I would say sustainability is one of the ways to go. In growing your own gardening, you reduce cost on vegetation and maybe 200-300 ringgit a month on your grocery expenses could be reduced to maybe 150, 200. This is just a rough estimation I'm getting, yeah? So yeah, that would be the answer.
Okay, thanks, Balu. Winston, do you have any?
Yes, for green infrastructure, it is pretty difficult to put a value or the price on what that did not happen. For example, a flood didn't happen in, say, Johor Bahru. It's difficult. It's difficult to calculate how many cars will be affected, how many houses will be flooded. But instead, I can tell something. On the other hand, there are many core benefits which I have not mentioned for green infrastructure. For example, carbon sequestrations, pollution control, and heat island mitigations. So these are ecosystem services provided by green infrastructure that are hard to value. They're hard to put a price on it, but nonetheless, they will impact the people who live in urban cities, and they will reap the benefits of these green infrastructures. So again, it's really hard to put a price, but there are many intrinsic values to for people to benefit from green infrastructures.
And I think ultimately it is also something that would be done by the government, I think, right? The valuation. There has to be some sort of cost of some process of prioritizing. And I guess a few criteria apart from the cost would be just flexibility, how well it works with other existing solutions. Because like you said before, different solutions might not work in every context, right? And they also interact with other measures that you put in. Okay. We have had 2 more questions come in. My friend says, regardless of our best efforts, we can't save the climate and grow the economy at the same time. What would you say to him? Well, if any of you feel like you'd like to speak to that question, go ahead.
I mean, to that question, I don't know. There are optimistic people and there are pessimistic people. There's pros and cons on both ends. It's a point of view, you know. It's a point of view. It's a perception from an individual point of view. So I really can't answer that.
I'll add a little bit on that. It's not quite true. You can still save the economy, the save climate, but then we have to do a bit of a compromise in terms of economies, what we call green economies. That we focus on renewable energies and low carbon initiative or projects. So to say that we can't save the climate and have economy benefits, that's not true. And I will add a little bit more on that. If we want economy so badly, okay, we go ahead and then just pollute, keep on dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and let the temperatures increase. The impacts predicted by scientists, if you look at the IPCC reports, those impacts are scarier. Yeah, compared to the recession is okay. It happens every 10 years or 15 years. It's bad. People lose job. But then what happens if you lose the planet? You lose habitable space, which is scarier. Food for thought.
Mm. And ultimately, I think that kind of connects with the discussion about how you define economic growth, right? Currently, we just put a number on it, like the GDP, how much the GDP grows. But there's a lot of thought emerging, I suppose, evidently not mainstream, that talks about how we can incorporate some of these other measures of well-being and environmental or ecosystem health into the economy. Yeah. Okay. We have a final question. What do you suggest should be done to change the mentality of the general public in order to encourage personal responsibility?
It's a good question. From my perspective, I think what could be done or should be done is to actually create more awareness, and that's never going to end. You got to keep creating it, keep shouting at every event, at every possible space. That's my perception on how it should be done. So yeah, create more awareness, create more options for these people to get the knowledge, at least, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this would be my, there should be more platforms that are encouraging simple gardening, at least in that aspect. That's one way to put it.
Mm. I guess the question following from that is, how do we reach people who don't already have the interest in it? Right, because we can have platforms, but then how do we reach those people who would never see those platforms in the first place?
think it's more of a question of lifestyle. And like in today's world, if you look at it, majority of people are moving into the more healthier lifestyle, right? We are worried about what we put into our body. That thought alone should trigger people in a way. And to be honest, creating those platforms is the first step because as of we speaking, I mean, as speaking right now, those platforms are sufficient. Although there are some, they are sufficient, you know? So it has to be simplified, in my opinion. Yeah.
Mm.
I'll add on to the questions a little bit. I'll use the examples of driving seatbelts. Now, 30 years ago, if you tell people to put on driving seatbelts, very few people care. So what actually happened on driving seatbelts that prompt people, wow, okay, get on car, I must wear my driving seatbelts. First of all, you need strict enforcement. You can't let the small trivial offenses go unpunished. There are no consequences if they commit a crime. So pollutions, um, these, if they throw the litters, if they caught by the authorities, no verbal warning. You should give them some form of punishment. Okay, if you want to compare it to Singapore, Singapore is small, but there are very strict enforcement. They can do it. Can Malaysia do it? It's difficult. It's challenging given the huge landmass that we have and the amount of people personnel we have to put on ground. So it comes to our second key point here. That would be educations. And there have been talks about incorporating environmental studies or science in primary school or probably in the high school or universities, make it compulsory for people to take and people realize it's not something that we can achieve the change in mentality in 10 years. It will take generations. And we have seen examples from overseas, for example, in UK, 50 years ago, if you go to London, the river there was terribly polluted. Right now, we're seeing the same thing happening in India. They're struggling with the Ganges rivers pollutions, whereby people have been doing all sorts of pollutions because it's the easiest way to dump stuff. So get educations, and then we need some kind of strict enforcement. Sorry to say that, but if you pollute, you need to pay the price, pay for the actions. So yes.
Thanks, Wintim. I think I would add a final point to that. Apart from these, again, I guess apart from these top-down approaches, ultimately, I think there needs to be a lot more discussion on the personal scale. So I think these issues should be more, should be somehow incorporated into polite conversation. So I think the recent issues, the water pollution issues in Selangor have brought a lot of attention to the environmental damage. So if we are able to kind of tie these impacts directly to people's well-being and I suppose rice bowl, showing them that the impacts of issues like climate change are very much local and not something that is going to happen somewhere else like the North Pole. I think that is a feasible way forward. And again, it comes back to that debate between doing something at the personal scale versus the large scale on like the government level. But I think ultimately both of these need to happen at the same time. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for all of your questions. And we're going to move into polling next. So you're going to see a poll come up on the screen. It should be on the top right of the video feed. So just click in there and vote for whose pitch you like the most. We have 1 vote so far. Keep them coming, folks. Five votes. We'll let it go for maybe 2 more minutes. If you haven't voted already, do click on the polling button and submit your vote. One more minute. Okay, before I name the winner, I do want to kind of recap and mention that these are only just 2 examples out of many, many possible adaptation strategies. And we will need many, if not all, solutions as the effects of global warming and climate change continue to develop. Of course, these adaptation strategies need to be carefully designed for each of the unique local contexts so that they don't conflict with each other and give unintended effects such as further increasing our greenhouse gas emissions or increasing inequality. But if they're planned out thoughtfully, I believe they can help our societies become more resilient. All right. On to the results. It appears it's actually a tie. So congrats to both Balu and Winsim. And I guess that kind of is a neat result because ultimately, like I already said, we do need to attack the problem on all fronts. Okay. Before we end this session, I do want to say we apologize for the technical issues. Unfortunately, Reza was unable to join us. And we would also really appreciate if we could get your feedback. So there will be a feedback link coming up on the screen soon. So just click in there. It shouldn't take more than a minute. Okay. And finally, for those of you who are interested in what MYD does, you can follow us on social media. Just look us up as the Malaysian Youth Delegation. MYD will be organizing a conference, the local conference of youth, at the end of November and early December. And the aim is to amplify youth voices and connect youth with each other and also with experts. So that's the Malaysian Alcoy taking place 28th to 29th November, 5th to 6th December, and 12th to 13th December. And this year, it'll be expanding its focus beyond policy and national solutions, and will be including topics at the regional level. So this Southeast Asia region, and other topics such as the energy transition, youth climate leadership, and nature-based solutions. So register your interest with us now, and you can make sure you will get the news to sign up. All right. Any last words, Winsim and Valu, before we close out?
Vincent? Selected.
Be optimistic, and we must be prepared to face the climate change impact very, very soon. So yes, don't give up. We can win this fight.
Absolutely. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for the time and, well, go green, right, guys? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you everyone for attending. See you.
Goodbye.